What's up, y'all? Welcome to Second and 15, a Philadelphia Eagles fan podcast presented by Old City Sports Network, the best network for all your Philadelphia sports needs. It's your host, Michael Roscoe. The preseason is over and the roster has been finalized. We'll dive into the results of that Vikings game, analyze the 2024 initial roster, and talk about what we saw out of Cooper DeJean and his first NFL action. But before we get into all of that, if you're watching on YouTube, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, which is just at Second and 15. And also turn on those notifications so that you don't miss a single moment of Second and 15 content. Also, don't forget to follow us on X, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, as well as for the Old City Sports Network pages. You can find those in the description of this episode. Okay, before we dive into the Eagles discussion for tonight, I just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. Second and 15, a Philadelphia Eagles fan podcast, and Old City Sports Network are brought to you by Righteous Felon Craft Jerky. With the season almost here, you'll want a delicious snack during that game time. I know I sure do, with some awesome craft flavors as well as being gluten-free, low sugar, and American-made. Head on over to your local store, or better yet, head on over to righteousfelon.com and use our promo code OCSN for 15% off your orders. Any orders over $50 will receive free shipping. We are also brought to you by SeatGeek. Head on over to SeatGeek.com or download the app on your smartphone today to get tickets for your next sporting event, concert, comedy show, and more. Don't forget to use our promo code Old City Sports Network with an E at the end of old and all one word for $20 off of your purchase. Additionally, if you can't make a show for whatever reason, they will credit your order towards your next purchase. Additionally, we are presented by Warlord Beard Oil. Head on over to warlordbeardoil.com and use promo code OLDSPORTS for 15% off your beard oils, washes, soaps, tools, apparel, lotion, whatever you need. For orders over $75, you will also receive that free shipping. This podcast is also brought to you by Decals by Aaron. If you're in the Delaware County area and looking for your next Delco merch, head on over to decalsbyaaron.com today. And finally, don't forget to support the ones you love who bring you this content, as well as content from other Philadelphia sports and pop culture, such as Quit Chasing, Flyers Alley, Check the Net, Living Room Show, and more. To do that, head on over to oldcitysports.com and check out our merchandise. From t-shirts to hoodies to glassware and more, use promo code OLDCITY for 15% off of your purchase. All right, y'all, let's dive into that Eagles news and discussion. Starting off our Eagles discussion, former Eagles running back LeSean McCoy will be inducted into the Eagles Hall of Fame on November 3rd. During his 6 seasons with the Eagles, he averaged 1,132 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns per season, while also averaging just under 400 receiving yards and more than 2 receiving touchdowns. Over his overall career, McCoy rushed for over 11,000 yards and 73 touchdowns while accumulating almost 4,000 receiving yards and 16 touchdowns. Between this and the retirement ceremony for Nick Foles, this is going to be a fantastic season for these veterans, as well as a nostalgic one for Eagles fans. I'll never forgive Chip Kelly for the Eagles' loss of McCoy. Just putting that out there. All right, shifting into the preseason. The Birds concluded the preseason in I'll say less than ideal fashion, losing to the Minnesota Vikings with a final score of 26-3. A blowout is an understatement. Once again, we did not see the starters like I had hoped I would and talked about last week, making it the second year in a row where the starting offense did not play in the preseason. The Vikings scored first and held on to that lead pretty much the entire time, as the offense just couldn't get anything going for our birds. The best of the quarterback performances once again went to Tanner McKee, who went 13 for 21 for 155 yards with one interception and one lost fumble. Now, that alone should tell you how things went for our offense. Running back Tyrion Davis-Price would lead rushing stats with 12 carries for 56 yards, while wide receiver Griffin Hebert led in receiving with 3 receptions for 38 yards. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, there's a lot more going on there, as we saw safety Tristan McCollum log 9 tackles, with 5 of them being solo, and 1 pass deflection. We also saw linebacker Ben Van Sumeren have a showcase performance with 6 total tackles, 5 of them solo, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss, and a QB hit. Now, with this game, I was pretty impressed with Van Sumeren. The second-year linebacker out of Michigan State was not only able to get into the backfield frequently, but his route reading ability was pretty good as well, especially in the red zone defense, perfectly reading the receiver's route and getting to him early, hitting him to force the incompletion. For as deep as he'll likely be, I think he's shown significant improvement, and our interior linebacker room looks much stronger than it did this year, not only with the additions and draft choices that we made shown. And my last player that I'm going to go into discussion with regarding this preseason game was none other than quarterback Cooper DeJean. So I know a lot of Eagles fans have been excited for him since we drafted him, and I'm going to go into detail about him. But we also kind of felt unfortunate that we didn't get to see him practice as much during training camp, as he came back later from his injury with his hamstring injury, and we got to see a lot more of his rookie counterparts during the training camp. After watching the gameplay, some highlights, and reading some fan opinions, some fans aren't as thrilled with his performance as I would have expected to be. Now, me, I'm not one of those fans. I believe he's got a little bit of learning to do and maybe was a little over enthusiastic to the point where he made a couple of mistakes, such as the block on the receiver after 5 yards from the line of scrimmage. But he showed more promise than I think people are giving him credit for. Based on this sole game, he would look better in the nickel versus the outside corner. But again, let's take something into consideration. Not only is this man's first NFL action, but this is his first football action against an opposing defense since November of 2023. For a guy who missed out on roughly 8 to 9 months of competitive football and then to play it again at a higher level upon that return, he didn't do bad. He did not do bad. There was a play where he got slightly beat for a pass in the corner of the end zone, but he managed to still make it a point to push the receiver when the ball was caught, helping to prevent that receiver from getting both feet in bounds. Granted, you could say that that's more of a mistake on the receiver, but nonetheless, he didn't allow the touchdown. Against a better receiver, however, it's likely that that play could have been a touchdown, but who knows? Cooper DeJean got burnt a couple of plays, but he had pretty tight coverage for most of them, in my opinion. This was more so later in the game than, say, the first quarter, but that shows that he can make in-game improvements pretty quickly. Also, if you didn't notice, they didn't really run a lot of plays towards his side of the field. And when they did, whether it was a run or a pass, he did good other than a couple of very fixable mistakes that make for great teaching moments for him. Remember, he's a young guy. He's got a lot to learn. He's got a lot of potential. And I think that combination is not bad, you know? Overall, I liked his coverage abilities, especially the slot fade coverage. I liked his physicality, his run play reading, and his endurance. He had a lot of endurance that game. He was coming out eager, wanting to hit. He said it in his press conference, and he showed it. Now, as for some critiques, obviously I love the physicality and the eagerness, but you don't want to let that cloud your judgment, making it more likely to commit penalties, as we saw with the early block, as well as with showing the blitz too early. I think on his like first or second play. Also, I think his hip rotation on receiver out routes could use some work compared to inside routes. Is there room for Cooper DeJean to improve? Of course there is. Did he perform as badly as some people on social media are claiming? Absolutely not. Some people on social media, YouTube, whatever, everyone's got an opinion, say they see him more of a safety due to the blitzing and physicality that he presents. However, DeJean had stated in an interview where he announced that he was playing in the final preseason game, he mentioned he's gotten most of his snaps in the nickel, but he's learning all three positions, that being the nickel corner, outside corner, and safety. Additionally, defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, when asked about DeJean's role on the defense, he stated, quote, with his limited amount of reps, we're focusing on him in the nickel. Obviously, he was drafted as a corner and eventually would like to see him out there and see what he's made of. To me, that sounds like Fangio has faith in him at the position, despite what some people on social media about DeJean and how he shouldn't play corner. Plus, for Cooper DeJean, if Fangio plays that too high safety defense, meaning we have two outside corners and a nickel corner, he'd fit into that scheme wherever Fangio wants him to be. As an overall defensive player, I still have high hopes for him. I think he has the potential to flourish as an NFL defensive back, whether that be at safety, nickel corner, or outside corner, and I can't wait to see more out of him. Definitely has some work to improve on, just as any rookie does, whether it be Caleb Williams, Malik Neighbors, whatever. Every rookie has anything to improve on. But for his first debut in his specific circumstances, I did not think Cooper DeJean did bad at all. All right. Our final and probably most important topic of this week's episode, the initial final roster. Now, Tuesday at 4 p.m. was the league's official cutoff time for teams to cut down their roster from as high as 90 players to the league minimum of 53. For some players, their roster spot is all but a guarantee. While for others, they got to practice and play their hearts out to earn a spot. Let's look into this final roster by position, and then we'll dive into some discussion about it. So, starting off with quarterbacks, you got Jalen Hurts, Kenny Pickett, and Tanner McKee. No surprise there. Those were pretty much a given. Nothing more really to say about that. At running back, we got Saquon Barkley, Kenny Gainwell, and Will Shipley. Now, to me, this was pretty much a given as well. All three of these running backs have dual threat capabilities. And with the running back rotation that we like to do, not any one of them has to be the star like we saw Saquon Barkley be with the Giants, like be that offense. None of these guys really have to do that, but will do that if they need to be. At wide receiver, we got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jahan Dotson, Britton Covey, and Johnny Wilson. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think we had 6 wide receivers rostered last year, but this time we only got 5. Now, I know there's practice squad things going on, everything like that, and our O-line's been banged up, so we probably had more go to our O-line. But this group right here is pretty interesting. Britton Covey continues to prove why he deserves a roster spot, not only for his receiver capabilities, but for known as being the best punt returner in the NFL at this moment, and makes the roster, to me, not a surprise. It was a matter of if he's going to get those wide receiver 3 reps, but when they signed Jahan Dotson, that was almost pretty much a given that we were going to see him as that wide receiver 3 starting reps. For tight end, this kind of surprised me that we only kept 2. I'll dive more into that when we get to the practice squad, but we have Dallas Goedert and Grant Calcaterra as your tight end 1s and 2s. On the offensive line, we have Lane Johnson, Mekhi Becton, Cam Jurgens, Landon Dickerson, Jordan Mailata, Tyler Steen, Fred Johnson, Trevor Keegan, and Darian Kennard. On the defensive side of the ball, For your D-line, we have Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, Moro Ojomo, Marlon Tuipulotu, and Thomas Booker. That's kind of like that wild card, sixth defensive tackle. For defensive end / edge, we got Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham, Bryce Huff, Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, and Patrick Johnson. For this position, no surprises at all. Nolan Smith, some people had some concerns about him at camp, but obviously the coaching staff sees the work he's been doing. He's, gained about 10 pounds of muscle, so to say, if you do look at certain reports. He proved enough to make the roster with what he did. I know there's people who got some concerns, but I'm sure he'll address that as the season goes on. Jalix Hunt, the rookie out of, I think, Texas Christian or Houston Christian, I can't remember, balled out in camp, deserved the spot 100%. And then Patrick Johnson, continuing to make the roster over the years, well-deserved. Love this position group so far. For interior linebackers, we got Devin White, Zach Bond, Nakobe Dean, Jeremiah Trotter, and Ben Van Sumeren. Now, despite Oren Burks' last preseason game doing well, Ben Van Sumeren continued to shine throughout camp and obviously got the edge over Oren Burks and lands that final interior linebacker spot. Now, for the biggest group on this team, defensive back. You have Darius Slay, Isaiah Rodgers, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Keely Ringo, Eli Ricks, Avante Maddox, James Bradbury, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Reed Blankenship, and Tristan McCollum. McCollum had a really good camp. He came as a surprise. I think he was elevated from the practice squad last year. Really made a name for himself at that safety position in camp and was able to land that final safety roster spot. So congratulations to him. James Bradbury, I'll go more into him later. But to me, for the most part, this defensive group comes at no surprise as well. Special team comes at even a less of a surprise. You got kicker Jake Elliott, long snapper Rick Lovato, and punter Braden Mann. In addition to the roster spots, you have a couple players on IR and the PUP list. On IR, you have tight end Albert O, and wide receiver, you have rookie Anais Smith. And of course, on the PUP list, you got safety Sidney Brown. And on Wednesday, we signed about 14 players to the practice squad. Those include linebacker Oren Burks, wide receiver Paris Campbell, running back Tyrion Davis Price, offensive lineman Nick Gates, quarterback Will Greer, defensive tackle Gabe Hall, tight end EJ Jenkins, center / guard Dylan McMahon, wide receiver Roseme Jack Saint, who was previously with the Commanders, safety Andre Sam, linebacker Brandon Smith, safety Caden Stearns, tight end Jack Stoll, a familiar name, one that we had released, was picked up by the Giants and then waived after cuts were made. And finally, you have tackle Laken Vakalahai. So there you have it. You have your final 53-man roster and 14 out of your 16 possible players for the practice squad. To cap off the show, we're going to dive into some roster questions, surprises, and my final thoughts. So starting off with the first surprise, I'll be honest, I was kind of surprised that Darian Kennard made it over Brett Toth. Now, I've heard on like a couple instances, a couple random articles that Kennard was having a pretty good camp. But to me, I feel like Toth had an equally well enough camp. And with his Eagles experience, I thought he'd have the edge over Kennard. But it seems like he was, just better enough to get the edge over him. I can't remember if Brett Toth cleared waivers or not, or we could expect him on the practice squad. We haven't seen anything so far, at least to my knowledge. But Kennard was a surprise. He was out of the Kansas City Chiefs, did well enough in camp. I didn't see any real problems with him. Just came as a surprise to me. But congratulations to Darian Kennard for making that final roster and joining the best team in the league in the Philadelphia Eagles. Another surprise, this relating to cuts, was linebacker Oren Burks and tight end EJ Jenkins. Now, for Burks, I know he was dealing with the injury most of the camp, so that really hit his stock down kind of before he even got the chance to make a name for himself as an Eagle. He was the backup for, probably the best linebacker duo in the NFL, that with Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw of the San Francisco 49ers. As much as I hate to say it, they are the best duo. So I thought he would have an edge over a couple of the other positions, not necessarily Jeremiah Trotter, but maybe so Ben Van Sumeren. But as I mentioned earlier, Ben Van Sumeren had a hell of a camp, and it was, he had more of those opportunities to show why he made the roster. And despite Burks' performance in that game against the Vikings, it just wasn't enough. Still kind of comes as a surprise to me. But we picked him up on the practice squad. He didn't clear waivers. So we'll have him available should anything happen, then we need to elevate him. As for tight end EJ Jenkins, it kind of surprised me because there was a lot of talk of him in this camp. He had 2 amazing catches in the Patriots game. I think they only had like a couple bad drops in practice, but for his size and age, I thought he was going to be the tight end 3 making this roster. Now, it could be that we only kept 2 tight ends because we felt the need to have more offensive and defensive linemen. We know how much Howie loves the trenches, but we were able to keep him on the practice squad. So, kind of the same thing. If we need to call him up, he's available for us and he'll continue to develop. Since he's so young, he's got plenty of time to develop. I could see him if he, next season tries out with us again. I could see him making the roster. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, a question that I have regarding this is obviously on injury reserve, you have Albert O, Anaya Smith, and on the pup list, you have Sidney Brown. So Sidney Brown, at minimum, will miss the first 4 games of the season, recovering from that torn Achilles at the end of last season's regular season. But when they return, who will get cut or downgraded to the practice squad? Or will one of these guys end up getting released? I could see Albert O getting released, though, if I'm going to answer my own question. He wasn't utilized a lot last year. Plus, with EJ Jenkins on the practice squad, the Birds have a tight end 3 that they can go to in the event of an injury to Dallas Goedert or Grant Calcaterra. And with Anaya Smith, I feel like the Birds already wasted a draft pick on McMahon with him not making the final roster. So I'm not sure they're going to let him slide down to the practice squad just yet and waste 2 out of their how many of our draft picks that they had with guys who didn't make the final roster. What's certain to me, though, at least, is that Sidney Brown should not be at risk at falling to the practice squad or off the roster once he's healed and reactivated to the full roster. If someone has to go in order to allow Brown back on, I could see it being someone like Darian Kennard or Thomas Booker. Booker had a fantastic camp. I'm not discrediting his performance at all, but with the defensive line and edges that we have right now, I think talent-wise, he's at the bottom of the totem pole and at a higher risk of getting cut. And for Darian Kennard, you have that last in, first out kind of mentality. You have a lot better offensive linemen who are ahead of him talent-wise. I could see him being on the chop block unless he, has great practices, does well as a second stringer, or if he needs to fill in the position for someone to get injured and it's not a liability. That's the only way I could see him keeping that roster spot come the time where we have to bring these guys on the PUP or IR list back. But what do y'all think? Let me know on social media what you think about who would have to essentially be downgraded or cut to fill in roster spots for these guys who return. Another question I have is, what number changes will be made? I imagine as the roster goes down nearly 40 players, some more preferable numbers are going to become available. So, who do we think is going to make the switch? Here are my current predictions as of Wednesday. I think wide receiver Jahan Dotson is going to go from number 87 to number 13. For a rookie guy, speedster like him, 13 just looks like a fast wide receiver number compared to 87. When I think of 87, I think of your Travis Kelce, your Rob Gronkowski's, your Tony Gonzalez's, just big, athletic, fast tight ends rather than receiver. Brent Selleck was 87. So I think that's more of a slim receiver like Jahan Dotson to go to number 13. I think running back Will Shipley will go from number 39 to number 30. Now, you may be thinking 30 is Quinyon Mitchell. I'll get to that in just a second. Number 39, I haven't seen a good running back with the number 39 since Steven Jackson. It's just a weird looking number. Too many curves. I don't know what it is, but it's not the best number that he could have as a running back. But 30, we saw that with Corey Clement. Not a bad running back number, I don't think, in my opinion. So I think he makes this shift to 30. Now, we knew that Quinyon Mitchell was number 30. I had originally predicted before this episode airs that he would go from 30 to 27. But on social media, there was a photo during practice where he was rocking the number 27 jersey, which became available with the departure of cornerback Zach McPherson. So in a way, I was already kind of right about that. Quinyon Mitchell goes from 30 to 27. For those who want a Mitchell jersey, now you can go get it. For those who've already ordered one, depending on where you order it from, I think there's a return policy. My last two number change predictions, I think defensive tackle Thomas Booker will go from number 59 to number 96. Gabe Hall was on the practice squad, who originally was wearing 96, but with him being on the practice squad, his number is up for grabs. And I'll be honest, I've never seen a defensive tackle rock 59 and be an active starter. So I think he'll make the shift to number 96. It's just a better D tackle number, And my last one, I think Johnny Wilson will go from 89 to 87. Now, he's a big guy. He's like 6'6", 6'7", or whatever. 89, some tight ends rock that number. You got Brock Bowers on the Raiders now doing it. You got the guy off the Rams. I can't remember, having a brain fart with his number, or his name. But with Wilson being a receiver, I think, going a couple numbers down to 87, I could see being like 82 or 83 as a potential number, but I don't think Wilson will keep 89. Overall, I think they picked the right 53 players for this team and have an excellent stash of guys in the practice squad. I can understand why some people might feel a type of way about Dylan McMahon not getting a roster spot despite being drafted in the 6th round. But if there are 9 other linemen who outperformed him, then that's just is what it is, People complain about James Bradbury being on the roster, but do not forget he's on a heavy contract, like 3 years, $38 million, I think, something like that. And with him at safety, it adds more depth to a spot on the team that we were dwindling at so much last season with all these injuries. We still have a safety on the PUP list. That's from last year. So that says a lot about what's going on with our safeties right now. Now, despite his lackluster camp, Bradbury has a higher value from a financial contract standpoint as well as a positional standpoint. Jeff Stoutland can make any offensive lineman a star, but defensive back requires experience and some natural talent and athleticism, in my opinion, that necessarily can't be taught. So I'm glad at this point the Birds didn't take the cap hit by releasing James Bradbury. Overall, I like where this roster is going. Obviously, with people returning from injuries, potential injuries in the future to come, things might change. But for right now, I'm really loving what this roster has done. Can't wait to see what it's going to look like come week 1. See the potential number changes. I think that'll look cool. And I'm really excited for this team this year. All right, y'all. That is it for this week's episode. Thank you all for joining us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow on YouTube, X, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok by searching at 2nd and 15. That's 2NDAND15, or by the full show name, 2nd and 15, a Philadelphia Eagles fan podcast. If you're more of a podcast listener than a viewer, you can also find the audio for each and every single episode releasing Thursday mornings on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Player FM, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see y'all next week. We're going to talk about the upcoming game against the Packers in Brazil. It's going to be a great episode. We're finally going to get to preview a regular season game for the first time in damn near a year. So I'm really excited for that. Don't forget to stay fly like an eagle. And as always, go Birds.